Hi, I'm Matthew Schwartz with Information Security Media Group, and I'm going to be talking about securing your future state through public-private partnership with my two guests. Lou Prevost, welcome Lou. You're Group Vice President for U.S. State, Local Government and Education Vertical for the U.S. at Splunk. Great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
And we're also joined by Bruce Johnson. Bruce, you're Director of Enterprise Security at TekStream Solutions.
Correct.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So, got a great discussion coming up, and I want to pull back the camera a little bit. Cybersecurity, we have all seen the headlines. The threat landscape is continuing to evolve, but how is it evolving in particular for the states and local government entities that you're working with, as well as higher education institutions?
Oh, I think the challenge that we have is you can't help but open a newspaper, or if anyone reads those, or any type of a journal or electronic, all the different, vulnerabilities, the hacks, every day there's another company being hit. And that just really hits our state, local government, education entities really hard. I mean, 2023, I was rating, it was the top malware on record, the number of different types of attacks. And, from your perspective, how do you see that, Bruce?
I mean, I think it's a mistake to assume that state and higher education entities are monolithic. They do share many similar vulnerabilities, for instance, the MOVEit outbreak recently, but each of them has very, very different threat profiles and capabilities. So, for instance, there are some higher ed institutions that are working in the DIB with DoD types of contracts that are magnets for state actors and have a very different threat profile from a community college, right? So we have to accommodate all of those types of security needs in very differentiated and customized way, while also providing templated solutions that apply best practices across the whole enclave, if you will.
And on top of that challenge, you also have a staff, because they're very, they have a shoestring staff on top of keeping that skilled workforce. Right? So there's so many different layers to the challenges that they're all dealing with.
Well, I mean, there's so many constraints when it comes to cybersecurity for any organization, but for these sectors in particular, you so often do hear about constraints. For example, with defenses, for example, with the workforce. What are some of the unique aspects you would highlight for these sectors?
Well, I mean, start off with their budgets, right? They don't necessarily have this elaborate budget to go and hire all the people that they would like to hire. And so they end up, doing a lot of, training and bringing people up in the organization. But as soon as they've invested a year or 2, 3 years into an individual, they're plucked off by private sector because they can pay more, right? So it's a really big challenge to keep that talented workforce.
What are you seeing, Bruce, when it comes to constraints, especially around the workforce? I see you nodding your head over there. There's some agreement, I see.
Well, Lou and I agree on most things. We've been working this problem for quite some time. In terms of differentiating, I would say capabilities, response capabilities vary very widely. It's economies of scale. It's leverage. How do you get leverage out of a program that all of these institutions have wide variety, as Mary Lou said, of budgets and funding capabilities. So when the state steps in, there's a lot more levers we can pull to provide a consistent level of service with really advanced tools for incident response.
So you brought up the state, and that brings us to public and private partnerships, for example. How can these help with the constraints? I mean, you mentioned getting some buy-in or some input or some resources, I suppose. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Or Mary Lou, how can entities better tackle these sorts of challenges with public and private partnerships?
Well, and I'm glad that you asked that one, because I think that unfolds a whole level of opportunity that can be taken advantage of. And we've been working very closely with LSU in Louisiana, and it really has been, I would say, a four-legged stool, right? Because it was a partnership between TekStream with the Splunk technology for their SIM, and then you had AWS that it's running on, and working with the state. so from a funding perspective, right? And what they did is really get aligned to your customer's customer, which is the student. What are the outcomes that we're trying to get? From a governor's perspective, he is looking for a cyber aware, educated workforce, because that helps you with your talent and attracting workforce, attracting entrepreneurs that want to locate their businesses there. And so I would say that the university was very keen on this approach to say, how can we be aligned, helping students get that hands-on experience in cybersecurity? Because so often what you find in the workforce is that you can graduate with your degree in cybersecurity, but if you don't have that hands-on experience with the manufacturers that are being used by that specific organization, a company has to invest another year or more into that individual. So by doing something what we call student-powered SOC, which LSU is taking forward, those students get that hands-on experience. And so they are so marketable by the end of that. And creating that public-private partnership, we kind of win at risk, right? To help make that happen. And Bruce will talk more about that in the how we did it. But it is really, that program came all the way down from the governor to, the campus, and then with private sector. Creating that partnership is what made this happen, to create that students going through that workforce.
I would press hard on that statement. That shared risk model that you mentioned was a real key to this program. These schools are not looking to outsource their security problem. They don't want a dental consultant, they want to train dentists, right? And so the challenge for them is they want a collaborative model that allows for them to own some of these assets, for them to do some of the security response. To a great degree, a lot of the pricing effort in terms of providing solutions in this context is providing incident response. How much time does it take to do incident response? By including students in the mix, they can start to take those volumes down, and then we shift our role to one more of a mentor. So we're collaboratively building the solution together, and they're investing in the technology, as well as Splunk providing, classes and training that help them to understand how to leverage the technology. So if they get rid of an MDR provider like us, they retain that investment over time. And of course, since we've got a 98% renewal rate with our customers, it's not a great risk for us, right? But the point is it's that shared risk model. And the rewards that come out of that model for each of the entities that play is exponential.
We've heard a lot about public-private partnerships before, a huge theme being sounded now by the US government. We've just been talking about state governments. It sounds to me like what's different in this scenario, though, is the risk sharing, perhaps? I mean, are there anything else that you would emphasize in terms of what Splunk and TekStream are bringing that differentiates possibly prior attempts or approaches to this?
I would emphasize what Mary Lou focuses on, which is how this is an onboarding for students into the state and into local entities. Talk more about.
And that's the beautiful thing, right? When you look at the workforce challenge that they're having, from a Splunk perspective, we offer up all of our training at no cost for the faculty and the students, anyone with the .edu, right? And with that, and then TekStream is taking the approach of they're going to train those students. They go through a whole background check, they go through testing to get this really on-campus job, right? And then, they're going to take them through that program. And the idea behind that is there's no reason why those students couldn't be working for the state. They can be working there in the campus. We can actually take this type of a program to a lot more places that could benefit from this amazing student talent that is out there, and get, student-powered SOC going on at a state, a city, a county. So it's a model that is absolutely reproducible. And why we say we go at risk is from the standpoint that, we're teaching these students, or should I say TekStream is teaching these students, they now can go on into these types of roles, but at any time, like you said, LSU still owns the technology. They can change a direction. right? So we're all giving in this model with the hopes of this amazing outcome for these students and for the technology partners that are all in that area.
And as you've been saying, minimizing the associated risks of doing that along the way.
Yeah.
Well, so what was the specific security challenge? I mean, you talked about the student-powered SOC. Let's just dive into LSU a little bit, if we can. Maybe we've touched on this a little bit, but what were, for you, some of the big, notable security challenges that this institution was facing?
Well, and I think, if you look at, like I mentioned right at the beginning, all the different cyber threats, different compromises that actually happened at the state and within local, and so Louisiana was pretty hard hit. And then you add on to that just the staffing. So in my earliest meetings with them, their real challenge was just they didn't have the staff to do everything that they needed. They wanted to do a student-powered SOC and add to the university's mission, but they didn't have the team to do it.
You need extra resources to do that sort of thing.
You needed resources, right? So that's where, the state stepped in to help fund, and TekStream came in and said, hey, I'm unique, I'm different, right? We will go to that mission, because I'll tell you, other MDR partners would not do that. Right? No, I'll take on that student challenge and be aligned to the university's mission of, producing an outcome of students that can actually hands-on make a difference day one when they hit working for a company. And
so you're working with students, training students. What are some of the security, again with the security challenge question, before we move into a little bit more of the case study, if you will. What were some of the big security challenges jumping out for you in that environment?
Oh boy. Well, on a macro level, it had to do with even measuring maturity of an incident response program. We have a model called Visibility, Fidelity, Automation, and Operations. That is an MDR-focused maturity model. And we have all of those dimensions that we measure as a baseline when we go in, and we measure that quarterly across the school system within the shared SOC environment. So
MDR, Managed Detection and Response. So
sorry, yes.
That's okay. I'm just spelling it out. But that is so that you've got this model, so you can tell if it could, how things are, where things need to be,
and where they're trending,
and then you can know how to get there.
That's exactly right. So you're trending that over time, and you're meeting regularly to make sure you're meeting program objectives. The other thing functionally that was important was how we onboard students is critical, and we'll talk a little bit about the types of students we're bringing on, but the bottom line is when they touch a keyboard and they're actually doing incident response, they need to have a baseline skill set for doing that type of work. So there's onboarding, there's vetting, there's online tests that they take, there's training from various sources, and then we have a complexity model where we score the complexity according to like the pyramid of pain, which is a pretty ubiquitous model in security, so that when students start, they're looking at IP reputation, file hash reputation, but when they get a little bit higher in the program, they're able to handle more complex threats, and there's very explicit gating and capabilities that we need to move that student in their own maturity journey in cybersecurity, as opposed to simply the macro program level. So maturity, I guess, is important for us.
What I think is also kind of cool is that when you think about the skill sets, talk about the tests that you do.
Yeah. So we've got a bunch of different tests on technology skills and cybersecurity knowledge, but our most indicative test, the one that correlates best to success, is critical thinking. And go ahead.
And what I love about this critical thinking test is this opens up this field to so many more students. From a standpoint that, hey, how many 18-year-olds graduate from high school and know all the jobs that are out there? Right? So this is a phenomenal on-campus job that they go through a background check, they interview, they have to go through this test.
Yep.
And what we're finding is we're getting all different diverse majors, right? People that have a music background tend to be pretty good at this, or have a communications. And I love your analogy on the music majors, on why you think that.
Just my programming background, I always found music majors to be uniquely suited because it's a structured creativity, it's very bounded, and it surprises people when they get into cybersecurity that it's not a regimented science, right? It is very creative. So if I can turn somebody professionally paranoid, right? I can get them to ask questions. It doesn't matter how many letters they have next to their name. If they see geographically improbable login and they go to the Facebook profile to figure out, is somebody really on vacation? That's the kind of person that I want, somebody that's extremely curious. And that happens everywhere. So for us, critical thinking is a really, now obviously there's a difference between that entry point level and really the higher level, but then that's our job, is to get them there. And yeah, it's working well so far.
So when you select and train students, obviously, like you say, you're looking for a variety of backgrounds, diverse backgrounds,
Given
critical
the
thinking
need,
skills.
it has to be. Given the need,
Yes.
the
You're not going to
workforce
find enough
development.
people otherwise.
Well, what is the demand? I know in Georgia it was something like 8,000 jobs for 46 graduates from public institutions. The workforce demand is it's a fundamental problem for our industry.
So how do you select, though? I mean, in theory, not everyone is cut out to do this sort of a job. What sorts of, I mean, you mentioned the critical thinking test. How do you select and train people?
I mean, I did describe a little bit of it before. Certainly, once we vet them, it's different. The program is a little bit different for institutions that have a formalized cybersecurity program than those that don't. So there's a little bit more preamble, a little bit more training up front. For those without, that requires some Splunk training, as I mentioned, and some purist kind of security training, as well as the standard shadowing, mentoring, looking at run books and
just to get them up to a level where they can engage.
That's right, and
with,
they can be
what's
effectively.
being
They can be effective, and then it's up to us to monitor the results and audit the dispositions and make sure the communication is clear. So far, these kids have been impressive.
You're amazed at just coming out of high school, the skills that a lot of these students have. They have grown, this generation has grown, has never known not having technology in their hands, right? So how fast they pick up on things, right?
And you can't believe the stereotypes either, right? Because a lot of these kids are really hardworking. They're certainly the first generation of students that had to learn how to hide under a desk to a security threat. So they take it personally. And if they can give back to their institutions, in many cases, that's a very noble thing. We're all doing a noble thing in security. But when you can localize it like that, it has a little bit more meaning, I feel like.
Yeah.
I hear from so many educators, the biggest challenge for them is getting the word out. Cybersecurity is cool. I don't just mean cool in hey, isn't, it's hip, that sort of thing, but people have a lot to engage with when they get to know a little bit more about it. Like you're saying, music composition people, it appeals to that aspect. So many communications, so many different points of potential connection. That's one great potential takeaway here. Just in terms of looking at the metrics, though, of what you're doing in terms of improving detection, improving response, looking at the overall workforce challenges, how has LSU improved as a result of this program?
Well, I mean, I like to think that they've expanded their program pretty dramatically in a very short amount of time. We have a model that allows for data sovereignty and autonomy for every school. Every school has their own environment dedicated to them. So there's some reticence to share, right? But we have built up a number of tools to do things like shared threat awareness. One of the things from the state, who was ultimately funding a lot of this, was they wanted a federated threat list model that they could understand how the schools were seeing IOCs that they were reporting, incidents of compromise that they were reporting. And so that was a part requirement, but what we ended up doing was expanding that to threat awareness, so that with things like the move a threat, you can understand which schools are at risk, not just which schools are at risk. You can populate into Splunk Cloud using our technology new searches that help us to hunt and pivot, to know how far someone's gotten, how deeply they've gotten, and how many machines they've affected, what users are affected, and we can do that on a coordinated basis across all of these autonomous environments. So that has been a huge benefit of the program.
Well, and I think to add to that, you've rolled out, 15 schools in 18 months?
Well, it's actually, we can do 5 schools in parallel at this point, and our clip rate is, a couple months per school.
Now, right?
So
Get
we
them
do
up and
5 in
running.
parallel. So onboarding is very easy for us now. We were paving with a machete, I think, at the beginning, and now it's simple because it's templated for us. And again, using our technology, we can propagate the starting point into any of the institutions as soon as we have authority to do so.
And from a Splunk perspective, we are the massive aggregator of all those data logs, right? You bring all that data in from all the different types of tools. And so that's more exposure for the students, coming in from the firewalls, the endpoints, cloud, bringing that all and correlating that data to figure out where are those threats lurking? What are the patterns we see? And then, having that experience shadowed by the TekStream team. I mean, they get exposure to everything because all these institutions have different tool sets. right? They all have, like you said, it's not a monolithic organization. They all have autonomy.
Different
so they're all different. They don't just have one of everything. They probably have a dozen or more. So that it adds to that complexity. And so you have to have something that can, bring all of that together and turn that data into information.
An important aspect of that is bringing it all back to a SOAR platform, an automation platform, if you will, that is very structured. So although the environment for a SIEM is very ad hoc and very oriented to alerting and detection, the incident response platform is automated with very structured playbooks. So we have runbooks for all this stuff, as everybody does, and playbooks, but the structuring of that incident response is actually a recipe for the students to follow in terms of incident response. So we also automate all the interaction, all the collaboration through message and chat. We interact with all of the endpoints, so if we have to change, you understand the kind of the SOAR incident response automation process, right? Reaching out to firewalls or the cloud or to wherever to affect a change that mitigates the threat. So the fact that we have that environment and it is one pane of glass that allows for shared context across all of the institutions is one of the major aspects of enabling students to do proper.
Well, and we allow the students to do the more interesting stuff, right? Because of those run books, you're able to say, okay, firewall orchestration, we're going to automate that. No one wants to sit and go change those configs.
Nobody wants to type another IP into VirusTotal, right?
It's not very fun. It's really boring. So let's get rid of the boring stuff by automating it and, automate the mundane tasks so you actually can get to the real stuff of actually threat hunting. That's the cool stuff. That's kind of fun. Go find, that kind of anomalous behavior. So that gets them going. And so it's
classic SOC problem, keeping your workforce engaged, be they teenagers or not.
Exactly.
So clear upsides here for LSU, not just with the workforce, but also with the strength, I guess, with which they're bringing to their security program now with an enhanced workforce, if you will. Any other case studies you would highlight? I mean, LSU is a great one. You're working with a lot of organizations. You mentioned the state, for example, getting better insight, it sounds, into IOCs, being able to maybe share that information across different state educational institutions. What else might you highlight in terms of case studies from these institutions that you've been working with?
Oh man, we get into all sorts of crazy stuff, right? And I'm not really free to share names, right? But and then all the different use cases, right? Because even when you look at cybersecurity, when you start to look at fraud in many of our states or institutions, that's a whole weave into these things, right? Because a lot of these are nation states attacks that are masquerading as a fraudster.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how that is being pivoted. We used to just look at, a claim, where now you got to look at where did it come from? How many came from that day? Anyway, that's a whole...
Trying to see the bigger picture. Well, and I mean, the U.S. government recently, in terms of, for example, attacks from this country or that country, which we used to think were solely intellectual property, theft. We've seen prepositioning now.
Oh.
I mean, things are just so much more dangerous. Not trying to talk up the threat, but there's a lot of risk.
Well, and especially when you think, especially on the government side, the money, the benefit systems. I had one state, it came down to, only 4 social security numbers that got compromised, but they were sending money to 27 different countries and 55 different bank accounts.
Yeah, the FBI, the IC3 fraud reports that we see, it's huge, the amount of fraud out there.
Yeah,
and
the problem is also the gap is getting wider, right? So for us, with students coming out of school, especially using, I think I asked you the 2 most ubiquitous letters at the conference is A and I, right?
At the RSA conference this year, yes.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't have those 2 letters in your presentation, you're missing an opportunity. But the fact that we're automating all of this workforce challenge means that the gap for the students coming out of school is that much greater. So to a certain extent, they have to matriculate to that top level, which is almost security analyst level 2 kinds of skills to be able to pivot and hunt. If they're using a lot of these tools. So what we're doing is we're training them, how to ride a bicycle and asking them to merge onto the freeway, right? And so for us, that gap is widening between what they come out of school knowing and really how to hunt, right? Especially with a lot of these new tools. So that is it's interesting, as good as everyone at this conference is at automating this task, the challenge for workforce development grows.
Right. Well, the more practical skills you can give a cybersecurity workforce prior to graduation, I mean, the better for society, really.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes.
We can all agree on that.
We can all agree on that. So How is this model scaling? You've talked a little bit about the scalability and the growth that you're targeting. What are some specifics in terms of that?
So, we work with individual institutions, municipalities, state agencies, and schools across the country, right? Not all of them have embarked on the JSOC kind of shared model.
A lot of them will call it whole of state. They'll call it whole of state or joint security operations. We'll even see regional security operations where you've got the state partnering with higher ed, and higher ed is the provider of cybersecurity to local government and K through 12. So you see different models in each state as they're all trying to solve the larger cybersecurity problem with the limited resources. Right? And so that's where I think I love the TekStream model, because the outcome is we're going to have more people that are trained that can go fill those spots, bring those expertise out, and help, so that the future of our states, our local and education aren't as bleak as they are at the moment, because they're getting taken.
They're not getting better.
There's lots of opportunity to help them.
Well, they're not getting better on their own, I should say.
On their own, right? It's really hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Yeah. And those state and higher ed partnerships are really exciting for us because they're solving so many problems locally for a workforce development, which is a bit of a different challenge than simply providing a SOC, right, obviously. The other thing is the way that we've architected the solution means that we can implement it. Anything that we do at an individual institution follows our model, so it's not antithetical to incrementally adding more institutions into the model. All we really need to do is add another tenant to our SOC and start to overlay our governance processes, in particular some of the training models, if they want to start introducing students. It scales organically really easily from one to many.
So really targeting workforce shortages. I love that you're training people to work where they are as well. So hopefully that maybe leads them into government service for a while.
Yeah,
that would be a great outcome, but they'll graduate knowing that environment already, which is huge.
And where Mary Lou operates, at that really high level within a state workforce model is exactly where they're pressing hard to make this work.
Mm-hmm. Bringing new opportunities to individuals who may not have previously been exposed to cybersecurity. Another, I think, really top-level point of all this. That's excellent. Where can our audience go to learn more about what you're doing? Let's say they want to get involved or they want to access it for their own institution or state. Where do they go?
Hit our website, right? Go to Splunk.com. So, and you got to know our website just changed because we are now Splunk, a Cisco company. So, happy to help with this. It's a passion, right? Right? Sure. It's something that it's very mission oriented, something that we can give back. I'm sure for TekStream.
There's a TekStream.com, and there's a ton of stuff on LinkedIn too. If you want to hunt on LinkedIn, a lot of case studies, a lot of testimonials that are there. So good sources.
Fantastic. Well, Mary Lou, Bruce, thank you so much for your time and your insights today. Great project. I love the returns you've been seeing, and I can't wait to see what happens next.
It's going to be fun.
Thanks for the time, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
I have been speaking with Mary Lou Prevost of Splunk and Bruce Johnson of TekStream Solutions. I'm Matthew Schwartz with ISMG. Thank you for joining us.